Welcome to the NC-CAV seminar series. Today's session is going to be on public perception of transportation fees and taxes. And today's speaker is Dr. Daniel Findley, who is a Senior Research Associate with the Institute for Transportation Research and Education at NC State University. He holds a PhD in Civil Engineering from NC State University and is a licensed professional engineer in North Carolina. He also has served as an adjunct professor in the Department of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering. Dr. Findley is an author of 3 books, 29 journal articles, and has given several presentations at local, states, and national and international conferences and events. He is a member of the Transportation Research Board's Operational Effects of Geometrics Committee and the Traffic Law Enforcement Committee. He was also a contributing member of the North Carolina Strategic Highway Safety Plan. Dr. Findley was selected for the Transportation Partnership for Excellence in Engineering Mobility Scholarship through the European Union in Spain in 2012. He also has been engaged in international outreach with a short course in Abu Dhabi, study abroad courses in Australia, and has served as a Fulbright scholar. Without further ado, I would like to invite Dr. Findley to give today's seminar. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that kind and thorough introduction. This was it's actually an ongoing project. It's just wrapping up with NCDOT, and it was a team effort. I would like to acknowledge my list of co-authors and collaborators on this project, and of course thank NCDOT for sponsoring the study, in particular Bert Tasico and Amna Cameron for their leadership and guidance. I don't have an extensive slide deck, and I don't have a huge amount of material to cover, so I hope that as we go through this, if you have questions, that you'll ask those questions as we move through this content. I'd welcome those. Don't feel like you need to wait to the end to ask any questions you may have. So overall, and I'm gonna tie this back to CAV. This is kind of more of a broad topic, but it certainly does impact and will be impacted by CAV and changes in our vehicle fleet. There are pressures and challenges to the long-term sustainability of our transportation revenue streams. These are changes in how vehicles are powered, and this influenced the questions that we asked in this survey. The 2020 study is a follow-on to a 2019 study. That 2019 study is published, and if you'd like to dive into that in a little more detail, that is available. And so we've refined some of those questions to better understand how the public perceives transportation taxes and fees. Overall, we again found that public perceptions of transportation taxes and fees vary by demographics, but in most cases not drastically. Many states are exploring alternative funding mechanisms and have been making some of the same changes that our state has made in recent years, as well as some additional changes. And overall, the study found that support exists for maintaining and increasing road funding in general, and there's a preference for the gas tax, but support does exist for diversifying funding sources. So this information, I think, will be important as we make this transition to the future of a new source of vehicles in terms of both how they're fueled and connected in autonomous vehicles. The gas tax really was a great funding source for 100 years. It really built our transportation network as we know it. But it's not going to carry us into the future, in particular with electric vehicles and higher fuel-efficient vehicles. So I do think it's very important that we do have this in mind in the CAV world as we think about whether or not there will be public support for changes in how we're going to fund our transportation system, and it is going to have to change. And so that's what we really focused on in this survey. This survey had a sample of over 1,000 individuals from across the state and was deployed in July and August of 2020. And we did use weights to generate estimates to represent the state population. We asked people to estimate the current state gas tax per gallon of gas. If you weren't aware, the current amount is 36.1 cents per gallon. That's how much is the state portion, there is also a 19.4 cents per gallon federal portion. So in total, you're looking at around 55 cents per gallon of gas when you purchase some that goes to taxes, again, 36.1 on the state side. We did use a split ballot, and I'm going to explain a little bit about that and what the differences were between these split ballots. And they were 3 different questions that were on the same topic, 3 different ways of asking it. Ballot A was a multiple choice question with the options that are listed on the graph. Ballot B was an open form question, but it asked the respondents to enter cents. And it only said, here's a box, enter the number of cents. Of course, you could use 150 cents to represent $1.50, but it was just a box that said cents. And then ballot C was open form, but it gave a box for dollars and a box for cents. So we thought that this would influence how people responded, and we'll see, and you can see from the graph that it did. Overall, around 30% of respondents responded with the correct answer. However, this was highly impacted by the way the question was worded. Again, we expected that, so we chose this split ballot approach to explore those potential impacts. And this likely supports the idea that a minority of people know the correct answer and that they're swayed by the question wording itself. And this was consistent with the previous study that also found about 30% of respondents estimated correctly. When presented with the cents only option, again, even though they could use 100 cents or more to equal $1 or more, the respondents underestimated the actual rate with approximately 50% of responses in the lowest category. So that's the tall yellow bar on the far left of the graph. Similarly, in the other direction, the respondents that were given the dollar and cents open form question estimated the tax rate to be 90 cents or more at a much higher rate than the other group of respondents. And that's that tall gray bar on the far right. We also asked respondents how confident they were about their answer. And the majority, 55% of respondents, said they simply guessed. 16% of respondents were confident, and 29% of respondents were not very confident. Counterintuitively, the least confident responses were the most likely to respond correctly. The most confident respondents were the least likely to were the most likely to respond incorrectly. So that was kind of counterintuitive. Their confidence level did not match their accuracy. And it's really not surprising that people don't know the cost of the gas tax. It's typically very minor in the overall cost of owning and operating a vehicle. It trails in comparison to depreciation, the fuel itself, the portion that's just the fuel, insurance, maintenance and tires, and financing. So this to me was one of the most interesting questions, and I think we did a pretty interesting job of splitting these ballots, so asking it in 3 different ways so we could see some of these differences and how the responses changed based on how the question was asked. When we asked where new funding is most needed in the state of North Carolina, if it increases spending on transportation, we found that half of respondents support maintaining and building highways. The next 2 categories, which were relatively equal in preference, were expanding multimodal service and improving safety. We examined the same question, and here we're showing it split out by urban and rural respondents. The opinions were similar. However, highway priorities by rural respondents exceeded those of urban respondents. And as a result, the urban respondents placed more emphasis on multimodal service, safety, and transportation technologies. So maybe that portion fits in with CAVs and some of the other technologies associated with transportation. When examining the same question by education levels, higher levels of education had higher preference for multimodal service and modernizing transportation technologies. And looking at age groups, we can see that younger age groups have more diverse responses with higher percentages in multimodal, safety, and transportation technologies, while support for maintaining and building highways generally increases with age. The plurality of respondents supported an increase in funding, while many also supported no change. And this category, the no change category, grew from previous years, which may be a result of uncertainty around the pandemic. And again, this time frame when we did the survey coincided very well with the pandemic, July and August of 2020. So we do need to consider that that some of the responses may be influenced by the pandemic itself. Another question asked about the satisfaction with NCDOT services. The respondents are also generally satisfied with NCDOT services at a rate of 73%. And these results are consistent with the results from transportation-related ballot measures and funding from across the U.S. In 2016, 70% of transportation measures passed, and in 2020, it was 80%. So overall, in general, people are very supportive of transportation funding. It's generally seen as a fairly bipartisan topic, and generally there's support from both parties to increase transportation funding. When examining the same question by urban and rural location, more urban residents think there should be a decrease in funding, although that amount remains under 10% of the respondents. And when examining based on education levels, as education levels increase, fewer think that it should be a decrease in funding. And looking at it in terms of age groups, the most support for funding increases are with the 18 to 24, 55 to 64, and 65 to 74-year-old age groups. We asked the participants where road funding should come from, and there was a slight preference for usage-based fees. The amount favoring the usage-based fees had an increase from previous surveys. We also asked respondents if they would support increasing taxes on their residential electricity use if a new revenue was devoted to meeting the state's transportation needs. And the vast majority, 85%, opposed increasing residential energy taxes, and the majority of those opposed it strongly. And the reason why we asked this question about residential electricity usage is because if you're looking at electric vehicles, a lot of people are plugging those in at home. And so it does make some sense that a transportation-related tax could be added to a residential electric bill because that tax is not coming from a gas station or fuel purchase. We also asked respondents if they would support or oppose the state adding a vehicle weight fee to account for the extra damage that heavy vehicles cause, and there was 62% support for a weight-based fee. We asked which of the following options would you prefer North Carolina to rely on: a sales tax, a gas tax, or a mileage-based user fee. Similar to our earlier split ballot, we used a split ballot in this one because we wanted to test a few options. So in ballot A, we told them there was an increase in, you could choose between an increase in the tax on gas purchases, an increase in the general state sales tax, or a new fee on miles driven. So those are the three choices, very general. Ballot B, we told them you can choose between an increase in 9 cents per gallon in the gas tax, a new half-cent fee for every mile driven, or an increase of a half of a cent per dollar in the general state sales tax. And those are roughly comparable. Again, 9 cents per gallon, half a cent per mile, and half a cent in the general state sales tax. Those would roughly generate the same amount of revenue. Ballot C was basically a doubling of ballot B. So it's 18 cents per gallon, 1 cent per mile, and 1 cent per dollar in the general state sales tax that would be devoted to transportation. So those are the three ballot options that we used. The general question in ballot A without specific amounts resulted in the highest support for the gas tax. So again, people are used to the gas tax, and so when we asked them generally, there was a lot of support for that gas tax. But when amounts were provided, again, those would generate the same amount of revenue for transportation. People preferred the sales tax. Ballot B with the 9 cent per gallon increase, the sales tax seemed to pull in some of those gas tax proponents. And in ballot C with the 18 cents per gallon increase and the 1 cent mileage-based user fee, the sales tax seemed to pull in some of the mileage-based user fee supporters. And now, although 57% of the respondents had previously indicated they would prefer a usage-based fee, ultimately the general sales tax was one of the most preferred funding sources. So there's kind of this disconnect between what people say they would prefer at a high level with looking at preferring usage fees, And when we give them specific values, there is a preference towards that general state sales tax that is not based on usage. As the proposed gas tax or mileage-based user fee increased support for a general, as those increase, the gas tax or the mileage-based user fee, the support for a general state sales tax over the gas tax or the mileage-based fee increases. So again, thinking about how this all gets integrated and is an effective platform in the future is going to be important. Respondents were given a set of choices as to why they preferred the mileage-based user fee or the gas or sales tax that they selected in that previous question. And fairness was a top concern for both groups of respondents. And we gave them these set of choices, and you can actually see some of the quotes that people gave us in the open-ended portion of this. 71% of respondents who selected the mileage-based user fee said that fairness was their reason for choosing it, while logistics and privacy concerns played a larger role for those choosing the gas or the sales tax. Privacy concerns were much lower in the previous survey because we completely left it as an open format. In that survey, we just said, what reason did you choose that? And so privacy only came up in 3% of those responses when they weren't primed or given the choice for that, where we see it as 18% when they chose the gas or the sales tax in this question. So again, that's another area where the way we ask it really has a big impact on our responses. And we were specifically interested in privacy because if you look at many articles about potentially mileage-based user fees, there's a lot of concern about privacy. But when you start talking to individuals and getting these responses, I don't think it shows up as one of those top things on their mind. Fairness is really something that both groups and all respondents really saw as an important consideration of the way we fund our transportation system. In the 2019 survey, 38% of people supported hybrid vehicle drivers paying less, and that generally increased in 2020. We did use a split ballot for this question as well. So for ballot A, we told respondents were told that hybrid vehicles are typically more fuel efficient than gasoline-powered vehicles. And for this reason, drivers of a hybrid vehicle pay lower taxes for their use of the roadway because they travel further for each gallon of gas purchased. Ballot B respondents were also told, and this was added on to what I just covered, that drivers of electric vehicles do not pay any gas tax. However, they do pay $130 per year for their use of the road, and they do that when they register their vehicle. There was less support when respondents were told this additional information about the electric vehicle. So that additional electric vehicle information had some effect. And I think in particular, people were reacting to that drivers of electric vehicles don't pay any gas tax, whereas at least a hybrid vehicle driver is paying some gas tax. When examining a driver's vehicle type, we found that drivers of hybrid and electric vehicles had higher levels of support for the gas tax than gas and diesel powered vehicles. And there could be multiple reasons for this preference, including that they like the gas tax because they don't pay it, or they don't pay as much of it as a traditionally powered vehicle. And so they may be thinking, this saves me money if we continue with the gas tax. Or we also have seen that some people see the gas tax as a de facto carbon tax. And so the presence of a gas tax essentially encourages lower use or less use or more efficient use of gasoline. So from a carbon tax perspective, they see some efficiency there. And again, please stop me if there are questions as we move along. Compared to 2019, more respondents found the gas tax either fair or inexpensive. 41% of respondents thought the gas tax was too expensive in 2019. So the expensive category has decreased substantially since the last survey. And this is another place where we had a split ballot here. And we thought that a monthly amount versus an annual amount may impact the responses. So again, we used this split ballot to ask about paying either $200 per year in ballot A or $15 per month in ballot B. I think the subscription model is a model that a lot of businesses are using. So if you can put things in terms of a monthly fee, they may look at that differently. In the scope of expenses of owning and operating a vehicle, the gas tax is only a minor portion, as I mentioned previously. So it's not that surprising that people find the amount to be fair. Ballot A said that the average North Carolina vehicle owner who travels 12,000 miles in 1 year would pay approximately $200 per year in gas tax. And Ballot B told them the same information, but it's $15 per month instead of the yearly cost. So in general, from our survey, we found that the plurality support an increase in funding, but they do not know the current gas tax rate. Even those who claimed to be confident in their response do not know the actual gas tax rate. And again, that overall knowledge or accuracy was only about 30% of respondents knew the gas tax. Many respondents believe that $200 a year in state gas tax is a fair amount of money to use the roadways, and they are satisfied with NCDOT services overall. They prefer a usage-based tax in theory, but when asked specifically, the sales tax preference is prevalent. And it is really important that the numbers really matter in the way we ask these questions. So the revenue generating potential of these different measures, 9 cents per gallon of gas, half a cent per mile, and half a cent in the state sales tax, all those generate equivalent amounts of revenue, but they affect people differently when we give them those specific values. So that equivalency is key. What amount of gas tax is equivalent to a mileage-based user fee? And people really have a hard time thinking about converting something that's a per gallon value into a per mile value. And then following up from that previous statement, only 30% of people knew what the gas tax was to begin with. So there's lots of things lost in the translation between gallons and miles. There are some subtle differences in opinions about transportation issues across subgroups. There are some differences between urban and rural groups and education level, but they're not extreme or to any large extent. So that's the content that I had prepared. I'd love to answer any questions you may have, and particularly if you have any thoughts about future questions or your own interaction with the gas tax or other taxes and fees. Love to hear those.
I have a question
Thank you so much.
for you. I'm sorry. I have a question. This is Stacey.
Sure, yeah.
It's interesting. Now, did you say this survey took place in 2019?
This one, though, I reported on here was in 2020. We did also do one in 2019. So I kind of intermixed a little bit of 2019 results and compared them into the 2020 study as well.
Because one of the reasons that I ask is that I think sometimes people, even though you specifically did a survey about the gas tax, people tend to think holistically. And by that, I say for the last few years, I would say up until recently, when gas was under $2 a gallon, I don't think people really care that, about the tax portion. Mm-hmm. But I just wonder if you had in the survey said if the total amount of gas was, X number of dollars, when it starts to be $2.50, $2.25, $2.30, getting close to the $3 mark, then I think the concept that even though the tax amount is the same, the concept of paying more then seems more overwhelming. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, I agree completely. And I think that's one of the nice things about doing studies across multiple years is you can see and control for that. So if we can see that, how did these question responses change as the actual gas tax or the actual gas rate per gallon overall, the cost of fuel overall, how that changes is important. And I think you can see a lot of this also in some of our border communities here in the the Triangle and even in the Triad where you've got large populations. You really can't fuel up out of state. But if you look at Charlotte, there's a lot of people, if you live in the southern part of Charlotte, southern part of Mecklenburg County, I know people, and I give them a hard time, that say they drive across the border to go fuel up. The South Carolina gas tax is typically around about 10 cents lower, and so their gas overall is about 10 cents cheaper. Sometimes can be more than that. So we lose a lot of fuel tax revenue for people driving across the state. Also give them a hard time and say, well, you shouldn't be using our roads if you're going to continue to send your gas taxes to another state. But I agree completely that people aren't focused on that gas tax portion. They're looking at the big picture and that overall amount that the fuel costs, $3 versus $2. I do agree with you and believe that that does impact their opinions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the question. Great one.
So, how the income levels of the people who have been participated in this study would contribute to the results, and was it part of the factors that you did consider?
So mostly we used the education level as the surrogate for income level, and there's a lot of research that shows that's a pretty reasonable relationship between education level and income, and it's not perfect, of course, but it does represent some relationship between those two. So we haven't broken out, but in our final report, which will be available probably within the next month or so, the 2019 report is available. So we'll have more of this information, more of these crosstabs, and I'd be glad to discuss this further if there's interest in specific questions. This was the question specifically looking at whether or not funding should be increased, decreased, or stay the same. And you can see this nice curve, particularly on the decrease side, and that's the one that I kind of focus on in my remarks, is that as education increases, the likelihood of saying that transportation investment needs to decrease goes down. And you can see, college educated, it's in the, 2-3% level. Only 2 or 3% of college educated said that they think transportation funding should decrease, whereas less than high school is a little bit over 20%. So a huge difference in education levels on, what investment should be made in transportation. So I do think there's a relationship there between kind of income levels and then looking at transportation as this important infrastructure for our economy, for our society.
I have a very interesting talk. Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is, what is the relationship between favorable responses to revenue? I mean, does it really make any difference if 100% of the people said yes? And is the state the decision maker? Are they going to increase the funding? That's the first question. And the second question is, I'm sure state, they have their plan basically for the road maintenance and new road, for example. As a result of new technology that we have, the cars are using less gas, and then the means of the transportation is also going to change. How do you think the state is going to basically fill the gap in gas taxes versus their expenditure or TO4?
Yeah, great questions. I'll start with the first one. So our steering committee did leave a lot of flexibility for the research team to come up with questions, and we did base a lot of our questions on previous studies done in other states and some national studies that we could make some comparisons to. I don't think that they are looking to necessarily increase funding, increase revenue. Really right now, the big focus is we've got to stop losing revenue. So if we look at all the metrics are kind of pointing in the wrong directions as vehicles become more fuel efficient, as we change to electric vehicles, the way we fund our roads really is going to have to change if we're going to be able to maintain and construct new roads. So I think they're mostly focused on that, but it just helps have some sense of, is there support for road funding just in general? And then there can be some value in this question just in terms of how people answer other questions. So it may be very interesting, in particular, if we look at these 20% of, for example, 20% of less than high school educated who said they think the funding should decrease. Well, we may want to look at that group and see how that opinion relates to some of our other questions. And so it may just help us frame some of our other questions. Your comment on, overall and the changes, one of the things I know that has been a focus of state agencies is really the lane markings. It's one of those important inputs for autonomous vehicles to help lane keeping and make sure they're in the right lane, make sure they see a curve as they're coming up. So I know state DOTs have spent a lot of focus on improving their lane line quality. It can be expensive to do that. The higher quality markings are more expensive. And unfortunately, our snow plows, although we haven't been using them too much this winter, they tend to scrape up those expensive markings every year, which is not the best. So, I hope there's going to be, continued focus to create that relationship and the harmony between what we're doing on our roadways and then preparing for autonomous vehicle and these changes in the means of transportation. The lower fuel tax is a big thing. I'll say the solution so far has been that for electric vehicles has been $130 of an annual fee. And so if you drive an electric vehicle, you're going to pay a flat fee of $130 per year to use our roadways. Whether if you drive 100 miles and maybe it'd have been much cheaper if you paid an equivalent amount of gas, or if you drive 20 or 30, 40,000 miles and you're really saving a lot of money by doing that. I don't think people use that gas tax saving in most cases to choose what type of vehicle they operate, but it may have some effect as well. Did that answer your questions?
The question really was how the state is going to fill the gap in revenue when you have all this technology in place where it's going to use less fuel but more mileages.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. So hopefully they'll use our study as an input into that decision-making process. And actually, we had a chance to present this study to the legislature last month to a committee that's looking at sustainable long-term funding for transportation that's chaired by Representative Torbett. And so they're gonna be consuming this information. I think a lot of transportation professionals believe that a mileage-based user fee is the way to go, but it is very much an administrative burden compared to the gas tax. So if you're not familiar with how the gas tax is collected, basically the Department of Revenue and NCDOT gets 6 very large checks. I think it's every quarter from the main distributors of gasoline in the state. So very efficient. They're just getting a handful of checks, put it in the bank account, start building roads. If when we move to a mileage-based user fee, now it goes to each individual. So instead of 6 checks, it's going to be 7 to 10 million different accounts that are paying based on the miles they drive. We've also got to think about travel between states or on private property. Lots of other things that we've got to consider when we do that. So it's going to be there's going to be some inefficiencies in the administration of that. And so I think those are the 2 sides of the debate really, are moving from the gas tax to a mileage-based user fee. A lot of states, though, are saying, well, if we move away from usage, a really easy solution would be just to turn the knob a little bit on the general state sales tax. Texas has done this. Several other states have done this. Say, hey, let's take our state sales tax instead of 4.75%. Let's make it 5.75. We'll take that 1%. We'll give it to transportation. Transportation and general infrastructure is seen as an important public good. It serves a lot of people, serves a lot of our economy and industries and individuals. So having that money is a very beneficial thing, and having that sustainable funding. So there is a lot of debate about, hey, do we just make it simple, increase the state sales tax, funnel that to transportation, or do we go to the user and measure their mileage and how far they drive? And I think there's a lot of interesting topics within mileage-based user fees, because it can be done with a lot of technology or not very much technology. I hope there's going to be a pilot program in the state to test out some of those methods, but other states are doing those types of pilot programs as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. To me, if I had to guess, I think the state sales tax increase is probably one of the more likely methods. I also think one of the things that can be adjusted is the highway use tax, which is essentially the sales tax on vehicles. That's currently 3%, which is one of the lowest in the country. I think that's likely to increase to 4 or 5%. So I think we will see some changes. It'll be interesting to see, which area those do end up being.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, this is Joe. I was going to ask you about the registration fee. Did you poll on that? And if you did, what were the results?
We did not. We kept it kind of high level. So it's a great question, Joe. And I was bringing in some of kind of our other research that focused more on the much larger suite of ways to generate revenue. For this audience, there's a lot of education that has to be done in these surveys to remind people that they pay in different ways, because it's all kind of spread, and it's really an interesting way. There's so many ways that we fund our transportation system. When you think about driver's license fees, your vehicle registration, your gas tax, when you buy a vehicle, that's the highway use tax, and there's many other little fees and taxes. And so it's a very distributed and diverse set of fees and taxes that do build into that. So it's not as prominent on people's mind because it comes at different times and in different amounts.
Have you done any study, rather than going into mileage based, to use case by industry, like trucking, like any other, like a big grocery chain, big industries that they use this road more so than anybody else?
We have not. It would be interesting. We did add in a question that was pretty high level and just asked about weight, and there was generally a lot of support for that, which is kind of expected. A lot of times in survey work, if you think somebody else is going to be the one responsible for paying it, you're pretty supportive of that. And so I think that's where they see that question is, oh, if we don't have to pay and we can make the truckers pay, or the trucking companies, then that's good for me personally. And so we do see a lot of that. The hybrid and electric vehicle drivers paying less for their use of the road. Also, if the people who drive those hybrid and electric vehicles tend to support that system. So I'd expect we'd see some of that those businesses, if they're heavy truck components, they're going to be supportive of other mechanisms that would not tax them as high. But we haven't, the general answer though is no, we haven't asked those specific questions to those industries.
Another question along this line is, why don't you also do taxes based on the pollution level? The cars that are going to pollute the environment much more than the others, they are the one that they should pay more.
Yeah, and that's why, and we actually did see that. We didn't specifically talk about pollution, but we did see that in the reasons for why people select the gas tax and liking the gas tax. And so at this bottom quote here, and we did see this as a pretty fairly common response, is that if a vehicle is fuel efficient, the gas tax is a motivation to seek a more environmentally friendly vehicle. So they kind of see that as a de facto carbon tax. And in the open-ended, we did see that fairly common as liking the gas tax for that perspective of being somewhat of a carbon tax, which then would be related to a pollution tax as well.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Great questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Findley, and very interesting talk, and also the follow-up conversation and discussion was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I hope, if nothing else, you know how we fund our transportation system, at least have a high-level view, and you know that there's 36 cents per gallon state gas tax out of that. We got to build up that accuracy. It's got to be higher than 30%. And I hope at least within our profession, we're higher than 30% of knowing the range that value is. So yeah, thanks for inviting me. I hope if you're interested, you'll follow up with me, and I'd be glad to share our full research report. Again, the 2019 results are out and published. The 2020 will be released. The full report will be released soon.
Great, and look forward to it.